Hi, I'm Jamie Flinchbaugh, host of People Solve Problems, and today we have a special guest, Henry Yaeger. Henry, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So, a bit of background: Henry's the managing principal of the Banner Group LLC, has 30 years of corporate strategy and finance experience with companies like Hershey's, something I know pretty well, and a founder and investor to new ventures like Guidehealth, a digital health company where he's been serving as the founding CFO. He holds an MBA from Yale and is currently volunteer president of the Greater Philadelphia chapter of the Private Directors Association, which is how I met you when I joined the
Yes, that's
association.
right. But we have a few things in common because both our kids are graduating from Lehigh this year.
That they are. So we'll at least run across each other probably in a few weeks
Yes,
upon that great graduation, which we only discovered by accident almost when we first met.
that's right.
Had that in common. I think another thing we have in common is your career path is very hard to summarize because it has many things going in parallel, and it's not just a twists and turns; it's a whole lot of things going on at once, and so quite hard to summarize. But that's the best we'll probably do. So we have an interesting topic we decided to talk about, and especially now as you're involved in this startup that you co-founded, Guidehealth. Big moment, big opportunity, right? To jump all into something when you're perfectly busy doing other things. So really the framing question we want to start with is how do you know when it's the right time to commit, to go all in to a new opportunity as opposed to what many of us do, which is sit on the fence either forever or for too long?
Well, I mean, it's a really important question, and in truth, you never really know until afterwards, right? As you're going through a process of deciding, you need to understand what your risks are, and so I think it's really important to evaluate the opportunity and to understand and really fully embrace the worst case, right? So some things we decide are, small risks, small duration commitments, maybe not a big economic impact if it doesn't work out. And then other things have a much bigger impact. So one of the things that I like to think about, and I think, Jamie, you and I have talked about this in the past, is thinking about most things in your life in terms of a portfolio. And like a portfolio, you can go through kind of a life cycle with opportunities. So, oops.
Special guest on the show is your dog.
Yeah, so I'm sitting outside on my patio enjoying spring weather, and my dog decided to come out with me. So sorry about that. If it gets too bad, I'll move him aside. But when you think about a portfolio, it's about balancing across opportunities and knowing how the choice that you're making at that moment fits with the other choices that you've made in the past, but also where you are in your life cycle of your portfolio. So, we know just from our retirement accounts and things like that, you tend to take less risk at some times in your life as you get older, and then you tend to be, taking more risks. And so I think you kind of understand where you are as you enter into that decision process.
Well, that's excellent. So, I want to frame this a little around a problem solving in two ways specifically. One is that, we're kind of largely talking about sort of career opportunities, but the same fundamental thinking behind this that you're sharing applies as much to other areas in which you're committing to something, right? Committing to a new strategy, committing to a major product refresh, right? Committing to upgrade to SAP HANA, right? Whatever, any big commitment, you kind of have to go all in on, and how do you make that decision? So, and I'll come back to some of the things you mentioned, but problem solving specifically, right? Some problems are just really big, and to decide to even work on that problem is its own commitment. And then some of the best solutions to your big, hairy problems involve a big commitment. And so you have to decide whether or not to go all in on that. So while there's some very specifics around sort of, your personal career choices, there's a lot of parallels to other aspects of problem solving. So I want people to hear it in both contexts, right?
I think that's right on. And I think, having an approach, a decision framework, or just really starting with like, am I asking the right questions? Those questions and that approach should scale, right? So if you're dealing with something, really small, like, what you're going to do, what movie you're going to go see, or going to dinner, it should be more or less the same framework and the same approach when you're doing something big. And so some of those issues may not have a big consequence. So it may not be worth investing a lot of time in them, but essentially you're making trade-offs. And so the question is, do you have a full awareness of the trade-offs that you're making? And how does that fit with your bigger picture goals? So in my case, I was fortunate enough to get to a place where I could take a lot of, call them medium-sized risks with my time, with my resources, because I had already established a certain baseline that wasn't going to change radically, even if things, ended up in the worst case.
Right.
Now, sometimes when you're in it and you're in the worst case, it doesn't feel that way. But in the end, you have the resilience that you've already built into your own system to be able to overcome those situations when they don't work out.
Yeah, so I want to tie that back to risk, because risk is relative, right, to what you have available to lose, or what you're willing to lose. So I really like the phrase "embrace the worst case scenario," right? And I've had my own experiences with that, where even my first startup, which is still going today, but has not yielded a financial return. So for a long time, I referred to it as my $100,000 MBA, even though I had another MBA, but this was the one that I actually probably paid more money for, since I had a fellowship for the other one. I learned a lot, right? So that, what's the worst case? I learn a lot. I spend a bunch of money and time in the process. So a lot of these risks, or a lot of these commitments, involve ambiguity in those risks. So how do you process? How do you identify them? How do you process those risks in a rational way that makes sense? And I'll say, especially, the earlier you are in your career, the less information you have to assess those risks.
Yeah, well, so again, there's no one right way, but a lot of times you just know that it's a fit or not a fit. So there's a little bit of your gut involved in just, your willingness to even consider an opportunity. Some things are just not going to be interesting to you. Other people may tell you it's a great opportunity. It's really, the greatest thing. But if you don't feel attracted to it for whatever reason, that's a reason to just, walk away without doing a lot of further due diligence. But then assuming that it does seem of interest to you, or you don't know enough to say that it's not, then you go through a process of asking questions about the opportunity. Usually there's a lot of information that is available that you haven't fully accessed or processed. And so the question for yourself is, what is there more to know about this that maybe I haven't asked for? Maybe that I haven't done a little bit of research. It's so easy to research things now, to get background information, to understand competitors, to know what trends are. So there's stuff like that sometimes we skip over, and we shouldn't if it's a really important commitment that we're going to make.
Yeah.
One thing I like to ask, and I do this sort of in some of the ventures I've been in, is, who knows more than I do? Sometimes it's somebody on your team, but sometimes it's not. And we like to have advisors, and when we're doing new ventures, we like to create our list of advisors. It's sort of impressive that we have all these people who are willing to spend time with us, but then we don't fully access what they know. And so when you have advisors, I think the question is, what do they know that maybe I don't know, and how is that relevant to something I'm about to decide on? Yeah.
It's really interesting, because in there you basically said, trust your intuition, but also when there's more information available, go research analytically and thoroughly. And so both can be true at the same time.
Absolutely. And it's a little bit of a hazard. And I've had this I would say like debate or kind of fight debate with my current CEO, and we sort of came to like, I think, a happy compromise, which is you need your gut, but you can't rely on it as the only source. He's a very intuitive decision maker. It's how he decided that he wanted me as his co-founder, and then we went off and actually recruited a whole team of co-founders. But you can't rely on it solely. And the question is there information that I haven't accessed? Because the gut gets you in the right direction of something you might be interested in, but it shouldn't be the only factor.
Right. I love that. And I think that's the, hey, are you an intuitive based decision maker or an analytical based decision maker? You really should be both. Right. And I think we don't say that often enough. So I want to get to the portfolio idea, because there's a lot of people out talk about abundance thinking and say yes to everything, and there's just limits to that, right? And you can't say, I've done this to myself where I have a little hole in my available capacity. I say yes to something which fills up 150% of that hole, and then there really is no room to say yes to something even more interesting down the road. So how do you knowing that we can always squeeze a little more in, right? There's always another hour in the day, not always, but there's often another hour in the day. There's getting more efficient, there's learning, all of that. So it's not a static thing, but how do you balance, short-term, long-term, big opportunities, small opportunities? How do you think about that as a portfolio? Because everything's at a different state or a different phase as you're trying to say yes or no to things.
Yeah, well, I think there's several things I can comment on based on your what you just said. One thing is, back to your schedule example. Not all commitments are equal, right? And I think sometimes we tend to treat them as equal. You put something on your calendar, so you don't want to get out of it. You say you're going to do something, you don't want to, your circumstances change, but you don't want to sort of break that commitment. But that commitment isn't a commitment unless you say it's a commitment, right? So I think you have to be willing to rebalance and to change your mind. And I think if you do that, it frees up a lot of capacity for you to pursue the things that are most relevant, most interesting, most rewarding for you. And so I often give out my contact information, and I have people who link into me all the time, and I, try to meet 2 people a week. And I tell them, reach out, and if I can, I'll help you. If I can, I'll tell you, but don't not ask. And then I'm going to prioritize, my time with you based on other things I have going on. And it's not that I don't like you or I don't want to help you. It's just going to be in the context of what are the things I have. So the first thing is just, sometimes commitments all seem that they're equal because we say they're commitments, but they're not, and you have to be willing to change your mind.
Yeah.
The second thing is back to kind of like the life cycle idea. So some things you're just not ready for yet. So even though, back to this kind of like abundance idea, right? There could be some really great opportunities, but they're going to be better for you if you've prepared. They're going to be better for you if you've gotten some other things under your belt first. And so it's okay to have opportunities that are deferred. It's okay to have opportunities that absolutely align with your hopes and dreams and interests, but that are not the ones that you should pursue today. And the key is to know why you're saying yes to something or not. It's based on, your situation at that moment. And it doesn't mean that you're going to, not pursue it ever. It just means today, no.
Yeah. No, I think that, we think that's the one and only chance, right? Is right in front of us. And if we pass it up, it's gone forever. Even some of the entrepreneurs at Lehigh, the student entrepreneurs, they'll ask a question like, hey, how do I learn more about this industry I'm trying to do a startup in? And it's not always the right answer, but the most obvious answer that is never considered is go work in it for 2 years, right? And defer, you can work on your startup on the side, but defer getting into it for 2 years while you're learning everything you need to learn in order to to go forward. And there's a lot of professions where that happens naturally, like legal profession. Yeah, I want to start my own practice, but I'm going to work for somebody else for a few years first. It's still more linear, but it's a missed opportunity. I often see it that way.
Yeah, and I'll give you a counter example, or like the inverse of that, just because I just thought of it. And sorry, my dog again. So it is that I just remember, like, I had an opportunity. I had actually done a startup that kind of failed, or basically I left as it was failing right after I got my MBA. This was 1999, 2000, and I found myself married and starting to have kids. Right, so got to buckle down, get a job. So I got a job at Unilever, large consumer products company in finance, and I worked really hard. Like I was basically 3 years behind, kind of took an entry-level MBA job, and I got promoted a couple of times in the first year, and then had an opportunity that I really didn't understand. And I knew it was going to be hard probably, but I really didn't understand it. And I worked really hard and I learned so much. But it's the kind of thing where if I had understood, I just never would have taken that job. But because I did, it gave me so much experience and perspective. I had experience, we merged two big brand companies together, and I was like the first Sarbanes-Oxley person, if you remember what that was. and just tremendous growth for me personally. But if I had understood it more fully, I would have said, "Oh, I'm not ready." But I was standing next to the problem. They needed somebody, and they were willing to take a chance on me, and it ended up, working out really well. But sometimes you just leap, because in that case, the worst case was that I was going to suffer a little bit in my learning, and it ended up actually being, quite tough. But I was, embraced and valued by that organization, and I got so much learning from it that it was definitely, the worst case was actually quite good.
Yeah, no, I love that, because it's, while I'm a big fan of, reading books, what a great learning experience, which you can't beat doing in person. So hard-earned learning can sometimes be the best kind. So I ask you one last quick question, only semi-related to what we were talking about, just in the spirit that we both have kids graduating college in a few weeks. What's your best nugget of advice for those graduating and heading out into the world?
That's a big responsibility to answer that one. Well, I can tell you that one of the things that I wish I had understood more when I was in that situation, and I know each kid's different, and so I try not to, give them advice as much as just give them questions. But I probably didn't appreciate how valuable I was for people who wanted me to help them with whatever they were doing. And you get a lot of mixed signals when you're coming out, so I guess the question is, how do you know that you can't be valuable to somebody that you haven't had a conversation with?
Love it.
So reach out, have a conversation. People love to talk to new graduates. They'll at least give you 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I appreciate all that. I appreciate sharing your perspective, and I'm sure there's a lot people can take away from today's episode. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the People Solve Problems podcast. Let's keep the conversation going. Visit jflinch.com for more episodes and other content. And continue to join us on your podcast app, of course. We greatly appreciate your feedback through reviews and ratings. Consider expanding your understanding of problem solving with Jamie's book, People Solve Problems: The Power of Every Person, Every Day, Every Problem. Available on Amazon. Until next time, keep learning, innovating, and solving problems.